doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
So if I can call the Honourable Minister for Environment of Somalia to come and give some comments, that would be wonderful. You're welcome, Minister.
Good evening, and thank you so much. And it's really a privilege for me to be here today. And was previously a great panel, and it's very interesting for us as well to hear it. Good afternoon, Excellency, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Somalia is remain committed to achieve. It is the NDCs, but recognize the $16.9 billion investment required by 2030. Comparing to over $2 billion annually. However, from 2019 to 2020, only $300 million in climate finance has been allocated. Emphasize the significant funding gaps. Key area for investment including renewable energy, climate smart agriculture, sustainable water management, and coastal development within the blue economic. These sectors are critical for Somalia transition to a low-emission, climate-resilient society and essential for building resilience to climate shock within fostering long-term economic stability. While Somalia private sector already plays a role in essential service, it is a potential to contributing to climate resilience is underdeveloped. There is a great opportunity for private companies to lead in renewable energy, climate smart agriculture, and coastal resilience, which are vital to the national adaptation and mitigation efforts. The Somali government has developed resource mobilization strategic and the private sector engagement strategy. These framework encourage private sector lead growth while ensuring investment prioritize both profit and social responsibility, benefiting vulnerable communities and advancing green technologies. To conclude, public-private partnership are vital in turning Somalia NDC targets into the ambitious and accomplishable and bankable project within $2 billion needed annually. PPPs can unlock large-scale private investment, bridging the climate finance gap. Through ongoing public-private dialogues, Somalia is fostering partnership to align public and private interesting for the sustainable future. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was, very enlightening, and we note the reference to PPPs, and we also would like to introduce IIPPs, institutional investor public partnerships, led by pools of capital. And you sound like you have some exciting opportunities there. If I can now call on the Honourable Minister from Gambia for her remarks, please.
Good afternoon and warm greetings from the people of the smiling coast of Africa, that's the Gambia. We're happy to join this wonderful panel that looks into innovative ideas to mitigate climate change impacts on Africa. The NDC, the popular NDC, the most popular word in the climate arena, has been the praise of everyone for so many times. And now they're saying that they need more ambitious NDC. What do we mean by more ambitious NDCs when we are already battling in the implementation of our ambitious NDC? The Gambia, I keep saying this and I will continue saying it because it's a model and a medal that needs to be given to the Gambia. We have presented a very robust, ambitious NDC that resonates with the 1.5 climate reduction targets, but yet still implementation is our challenge. It has been costed to $4 billion US by nature of the small environment that we have. As mentioned by the previous panel, the size of the country usually also serves as both an advantage and a disadvantage to private sector players. And here we are faced with the Gambia. But again, one thing that we do is we have a very strategic locations in terms of our market viability and potentials. Despite the small size in both population and land, the potential is there to connect to other regions. I will just give you a hint of why the Gambia is so attractive in investment. Life in the Gambia is cheaper, is the cheapest in the sub-region. Despite the fact that we are all struggling with the effect of COVID and other instabilities, but it's still the cheapest in the sub-region, indicating that investment in the region or in the Gambia is cheaper. And even access to other, it's just the crossing point to get to other countries. That's how the Gambia is. For the NDC, we've just launched the implementation plan of our NDC 2, which has been costed, but again, from the presentation that I've just witnessed, indicates for us that we have some gaps. In as much as you have a plan, the plan needs to communicate as to how to access the finance. The plan needs to be detailed to touch base with the investors, knowing fully well that at the climate change, we have in commitments to fulfilling pledges. What do we want to do now? To induce private sector players in mitigating adaptation and other climate challenges. That's the hard fact. And for the Gambia with our NDC, we have 5 critical areas. One is agriculture. Agriculture is the backbone of our economy. More than 70% of the population are employed by this sector, and it contributes more than 20% to our GDP. This is how important the agriculture is. But again, it has been affected by the impact of climate change. Saltwater intrusion is affecting rice productions to the extent that before, I was informed that our grandparents used to use rice to paint their houses when the season ends because they don't want to eat the old rice. So they will pound it to powders and use it as paint. But today we are importing rice. We are not only importing rice, even we are struggling to get that to meet the demand. So that tells you that the potential is there to produce. But then we are not because of climate change impacts and other socioeconomic challenges that we're facing. So there is a huge potential for private investment in this sector. But not only that, we also blend this with a climate smart agriculture, which has been also motivated by other impacts in the sub-region. We have energy deficiency in the country and the sub-region. But good to tell you that because of our nature, we have the OMVG, that's the River Gambia River Basin. We have 4 countries that are into this: Guinea, Senegal, the 2 Guineas, Bissau and Conakry, and Senegal and the Gambia. We have built an infrastructure that can connect and we can supply from each of these sub-regions energy. So if we are in the Gambia and then we're having the sun that has never given us invoice, why can't we leverage on this? When we are going into fossil fuel, that is damaging our environment and our health. But then the sun is there, and the Gambia sun has been remarkably praised to be one of the most quality in terms of energy supply. And then we have the potential to connect to other region, to the sub-regions, as I mentioned here. But we are under access to fundings, the private sector players. We have in the transport sector, when we are talking about the efficient infrastructure, and this is the climate infrastructure, and it's also another huge investment. But one thing I keep saying is, the investors have a very sharp eye. As a politician, I will struggle for the rest of my life without seeing potential, as any other person, but the investor have a very sharp eye. When they look at anything or scrutinize, they see potential that are endless. So sometimes as a country, or maybe as a politician, or maybe as an environmentalist, we will not be able to see these critical pointers. So collaborating with the investors should be able to open these pointers. There was this mention on the biodiversity and restorations, which the Gambia is having the gap as well. It's our key priority in the NDC, but the gap is there. And we need the private sector collaborations. That's why with the Department of Parks and Wildlife, we are working on a PPP document, how to open up to entice the private sector to play into this market. Government is challenging to manage the infrastructure for the simple reason that the investors here would tell me why. It's difficult for government to manage their assets, their own assets. So we're having this deterioration of our assets. That is the key backbone of our tourism sector, which Gambia has been known. That's why we call it Smiling Coast of Africa. But because of your losing, due to the impact of climate change, this thing is taking us back. So we need to open up a private sector player to come and invest in this sector, kill two birds with one stone, leverage on the potential to support the SDG, but also mitigate the climate impacts. And again, of course, our tourism sector, which has been very vibrant in the old days, and this needs to come back again. Finally, I understand and I believe that investing in especially small countries like the Gambia would require a de-risking mechanism. That's the fact. Investors don't have money just to give grants. That's why we are calling for the PPP. You put in, I put in, then we balance, then we reduce your risk. So if investors are given the de-risking mechanism to be able to balance the challenges of failure, sometimes it's not failing because of the money. The reputation has been mentioned here. Sometimes just because you are an investor, your project or your investment failing is a bad reputation for you, not the money. So it is important that to have that mechanism to bridge the gap of failure, because the fear of failure is driving most people from investing in markets, especially small economies like the Gambia. So we call in for this so that we'll be able to entice and get all these beautiful philanthropists to invest in the Gambia. Match it. Let's match it. Those that are there to support climate mitigation impacts, well, philanthropists, they just want the goodwill. They just want Mother Earth to breathe very excellently. That's their intention. They don't need money. Those that want to put something aside for the future, that's the financial aspect. And those that want to serve political gains, that's the public. Needs to come together to match interests and invest in matters of climate change. It's affecting all of us together, and we don't have any time to waste. So I will save your time for that matter. Thank you so much.
Very well put, Honourable Minister. We look forward to those institutional investor-public partnership opportunities with you in aligning risk. Thank you very much, Ministers, for those excellent and inspiring insights, and we really do welcome that spirit of collaboration. We are long-term investors, we are long-term partners, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you and fellow governments across the African continent. So we're now in the panel where we're going to hear some private sector and investor perspectives on facilitating institutional investor-public partnerships for NDC projects. I don't think there's any need to set this into any different sort of context other than what we probably heard in the first panel. The spirit of partnership was defined. The willingness was defined. I'm sorry. Okay. Was I being recorded? The spirit of partnership was defined. The willingness was defined. And I think it's now about the mechanism. If there was a mechanism that was delivering private capital mobilization up to the 24th of September 2024 that was successful, then why hasn't the private capital been mobilized? it means we're going to have to think about something from the 25th of September going forward that is going to be capable of reaching even higher heights and ambitions. And I think the issue is not about the money, the issue is about the willingness to think about doing things differently to pursue the prospect of getting a different outcome. So that's exactly what colleagues on this panel are going to take us through. And let me just tell you who they are. Again, elite and distinguished, investors and investment experts, and the NDC partnership, who we're very pleased to partner with on this panel by their esteemed leader, Pablo. I have to say I have an observation about Pablo, and I have an observation about the NDC partnership. When we started working with them about 3 years ago, I thought to myself, well, let's have one engagement because clearly there's a different mindset there. I've been completely overwhelmed with their vision, their commitment to working with the private sector, their commitment to taking on board new ideas and new approaches. So please join me in giving NDCP Partnership a round of applause. That's the type of leadership that excites us, Pablo, and we are very enthusiastic about how you can take this into the next review and round of the NDCs that will be deposited in 2025. So I really just introduced Pablo Vieira, who's the Global Director of the NDCP Partnership. I'm now also going to call on another leader, which is Dr. Sharon Fitzgerald, as a partner at DLA Piper and a member of the Sustainable Markets Initiative Council and the Legal Services Hub. I'm going to call on another good friend and leader, Marc-Andre Blanchard, one of the largest infrastructure investors globally, who is the Executive Vice President and the head of CDPQ Global and the Global Head of Sustainability. We can clap. We're at that stage now where it's the home run. I'm sure we're going to get back into this. Catherine Cax, who is the Managing Director of the Soros Economic Development Fund. And you'll hear from Catherine. I think we should clap a bit louder. She's just launched a $400 million fund for climate in Africa. So there we go. And then we have Fredrik Nydstrom, who is the Head of Sustainability and Governance at AP3, which is essentially the third Swedish pension fund. You're welcome, Fredrik. And a member of the Institutional Investor Group on climate change's work on emerging markets in Africa. So I'm going to start with you, Pablo. I've just sort of set the scene by making everyone understand that you are a strategic thinker, a strategic doer. You really do embrace working with the private sector, and you've got a new vision about how you're working with the private sector because you're regularly working with us. And now you're regularly working with the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and you're regularly going to be looking for more private capital to meet the new and even more ambitious NDCs. Just tell us a bit about this vision and your private sector engagement strategy. Even while you're here, I know you've got a number of different engagements with the private sector and the investment community. So can you just tell us, what we should be looking out for, how we can support your efforts on private sector engagement and private capital mobilization?
Thank you very much, Hubert. And again, it's a pleasure to be here and to partner with you over the last few years. I think that we have come a long way, but we still have a lot to do. So we appreciate Africa Investor and Sustainable Markets Initiative for organizing this conversation and to keeping the conversation going nonstop. Just to provide a little context, the NDC partnership was launched back at the end of 2016 as global initiative to support developing countries advance their NDCs and driving sustainable development. Today, we're talking about a coalition of more than 200 members with 130 countries, both developed and developing, and over 100 institutions that are working together to drive climate action and support the needs of developing countries. We support both the development of new NDCs, and next year is a critical year for that, where countries have the mandate to deliver their NDCs 3.0 as they're being called, and I'll come back to that in a minute. but we also support countries in the implementation of their NDCs. And I think we heard very clearly from the two ministers that that is the key challenge today. And the way we do it is that countries come to us with requests for support, and those specific requests for support that can be associated with the development of an implementation plan for their NDC, an investment plan for their NDC, identifying their sectoral investment priorities, devising what are the policies or the laws that they need to drive implementation, or the development of investment finance strategies or private sector engagement. We share those requests with our broad membership, and they come back with a package of support. Also, we reduce the burden on the developing countries, bringing together under a single framework the support from MDBs, from DFIs, from the UN, from civil society organizations, and others that are willing to support the advancement of the climate commitments of the countries. But what we have realized is that 7 years ago, 8 years ago, many developing countries assumed and thought that the available public finance was going to be enough for them to implement their NDCs and to drive the transitions that were required. And there was a lot of trust put on the negotiations to deliver on the 100 billion, and now this year we're negotiating the new number, and on the GCF and other funds to provide that critical finance to the implementation of their NDCs. The reality is that the processes are not perfect, but it's very clear that the amount will not be enough ever, and that the private sector needs to come in as a critical stakeholder. So that's when we moved from just engaging pretty much as an intergovernmental initiative with intergovernmental organizations and countries to start to talk to the private sector. Because we clearly and quickly identified that gap, that finance gap that has been mentioned many times. So we decided to work both with the developing countries to understand where they are, what they needed, but also with the different types of financiers to understand where they are. And start with just basic translation in terms of the language of both sides and try to understand how to bridge that gap. And to use the focal points in governments that include not only ministers of environment or climate, but also ministers of finance to help generate that connection. We currently support 44 countries in Africa, including very proudly Somalia and the Gambia. And what we're seeing is that countries more and more come to us with requests associated with finance. In fact, that's the #1 area of request that the partnership receives. And that covers things from improving enabling environments to developing and financing NDC projects to engaging the private sector or to developing investment plans. Almost half of all finance-related requests that we're receiving from the 100 countries where we're supporting come from Africa. So Africa clearly understands the challenges and what they need to do to advance the implementation of their NDCs, but they're facing huge challenges in doing so. Because the reality is that also that even if money was readily available, and there is money, maybe not in the right places, but even if it was there, countries are not there yet ready to absorb that because they have challenges in understanding programmatically how to advance. They have challenges in terms of developing projects, and we talk about project development in the previous session. They don't have the right enabling environments. They don't have the right mechanisms to blend to the risk. So that's the kind of support that we're trying to mobilize to put countries in a position to face financiers, to face the private sector with clear plans, investment plans that understand how to use the different sources of finance in an effective way to effectively mobilize private sector, but also trigger that transitions that do not only deliver on the climate and the environmental commitments, but that really drive the social and economic benefits. Because at the end of the day, for developing countries, the climate crisis is a development crisis, and it's the opportunity to shift that development into one that is compatible with the climate crisis. No, so it's a huge opportunity. And this brings me to the last point I want to make. The next round of NDCs next year, I hear you, Minister, the frustration of coming back to the board and raising ambition again without successfully implemented is something that we hear every day. But if NDCs are developed with high quality, with processes that engage the whole of government, the whole of society, that are linked to the development priorities of the government, that are implementable and investable, they make a huge difference in getting the process of implementation started. And they send a clear message to the private sector, to the public sector, to the international community, to the national community about the direction of travel of the country, not the climate direction of travel, the development direction of travel, which is fundamental. But we need to step up and work together to provide that technical assistance that will allow countries to be ready to face the financiers. So that's, I think, a lot of this conversation, and bringing together private sector, philanthropies, UN organizations, MDBs, to do it is necessary because no one can do it on its own. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pablo. That's the way to approach it. But you and I have been speaking over the years as we begin to think about, options, let me say, options. And to develop a pipeline of bankable and investable projects without the technical expertise and participation of the private sector might be a missed opportunity relative to then going to the private sector when you could have actually, or we could develop it with the private sector. And in developing it with the private sector, we could actually already be minimizing the need for project development or project preparation funding. So I wonder, at this time now where we're reviewing and we're going into new and ambitious NDCs, is this not an opportunity for all of us to say, as investors, do we have portfolio companies that have the expertise and that might see genuine opportunity in forming these types of institutional investor-public partnerships to help governments deliver on their NDCs as a first step, and then as a second step, working with governments to go to UNFCCC and say, let's actually classify this as an NDC project. So there's not so much pressure on the governments to develop NDC projects. There's not so much pressure on yourselves or other donors, but it's a collaborative effort. Is there an opportunity to do that given what we want to accomplish and the speed, and can we do that together?
And one of the things that we did to support countries think of their new NDCs in terms of their ambition, but also that investability and implementability, was to design what we call the NDC 3.0 Navigator, which is helping countries navigate those opportunities. And one of the critical constituencies that we consulted was the private sector, so that they would bring those elements of what needs to be reflected in the NDCs for them to be investable by them. And I think it's fundamental for countries, and one of the recommendations that is there, the private sector needs to be at the table when you're developing your NDC. Not you generate that ownership, but you trigger those moments that you're talking about in terms of from early moments on. This is an opportunity that private sector says they can share back with you what they need in terms of the enabling environments and other things so that you can put it in your NDC. But what we need to do is, NDCs will not give all of that. So countries need to have that implementation plan that identifies those programmatic priorities that actually create a narrative that is understandable by the private sector, that they can engage early on. And then you can talk about the project pipeline, and the private sector can come in from the early stages to help develop those projects because they understand the direction of travel, that narrative, the clarity that an investment plan can bring even without those projects fully developed.
Yes, fantastic. No, thank you very much, Pablo. That's clear. And maybe from the investor side, in terms of the investment plan, and now I'm going to come to you, Sharon. We have our own sort of view about, what's a standardized approach that could really help accelerate, the mobilization of private capital. And we always talk about it in the context of an institutional investor-public partnership, which is just simply saying that institutional investors can engage with governments directly, and whatever resources governments can bring to align interests, and then we look at what institutional investors can bring to align interests, then we can basically see how those resources can pursue the aspirations of the NDC. So Sharon, I'm going to come to you and just ask you just to tell us a little bit more about, the model law and what it solves, just in terms of how it could mobilize private capital at scale and be deployed at speed to support governments. And there is this continuing call for what we're describing as presidential climate investment units where, if there isn't the capacity in the market currently to do large, big, and ambitious investments, then perhaps there could be a process where within the President's office, I think that's what we were saying, there could be expertise and a focused unit in addition to everything else that's already happening. It's not one or the other. Perhaps you might just want to tell us a little bit about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Hubert, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to just say, Hubert, from my own personal perspective, I've worked as a projects lawyer for over 25 years, worked for governments from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, and what I've learned along the way is that sometimes what needs to happen is for there to be a change in the legal institutions in order to encourage investment to happen. So not needed in every jurisdiction, but needed quite often across the world. So in terms of my learning, I've seen governments where priority isn't given to climate projects, where there's not the capability or the capacity within the ministries to undertake the procurement. But sometimes it can be the law itself. So when we talk about public and private engaging together, often the blocker is procurement law. And that concern that by having the discussion between government and private sector that somehow the government is favouring one private sector entity over another. And so from my experience, I'm thinking that if we keep thinking and doing as we've been doing for the last 25 years, that we won't get the investment at speed and at scale that is needed for all the NDC investment that we've heard about today. So lawyers are often thought of as being blockers to things happening. So as you mentioned, Hubert, I do remember a couple of years ago you said to me, Sharon, give me your moonshot in terms of what can we do legally to be helping with the realisation of NDCs. So that brought about the model law for institutional investor-public partnerships. It's a combination of a procurement, a PPP instrument. Some countries already have PPP and procurement laws that are good, but they're not administered in a way that would actually help with the fast tracking and at scale opportunities that we need. But some of the thoughts on what governments could think about, Hubert has just touched on this idea of the Climate Procurement Authority, Presidential Investment Authority, we could call it lots of different things. But if we think of what happened during COVID, where there was a need to procure vast amounts of equipment at scale, it was incredible how much procurement actually happened in a very short space of time. Some of that procurement, as we all know from each of our jurisdictions, wasn't the best procurement, but there was some really good procurement, and the good examples were where there was cross-ministerial collaboration in COVID task forces. So if you hold that thought, then think about PPP units that are in country, procurement authorities that are in country, doing fantastic jobs, but they're so busy with doing the, let's call it the business as usual procurement, that there's not necessarily the availability to be given towards procuring climate projects. Government client working with, talking to them about the procurement of a flood prevention consultant. Now that should be a really easy procurement, something that should be done quickly. It was taking over 18 months for that particular consultant to be procured, and that was because the consultant was in a long line of other consultants which were needed by that government for all sorts of different projects. So the idea of this specialised investment unit could sit within the office of the President, or the Prime Minister, or the Ministry of Finance, depends on the jurisdiction. But the key thing is that it's a unit that is tasked with picking up, as Pablo was saying, the NDC 3, the implementation plans, and actually making those plans happen quickly and effectively. So that unit could be staffed by officials from other ministries. There could be secondees from the private sector. But that unit is responsible for everything NDC related, and that includes the implementation of the projects, not just the procurement, but also all the reporting, because governments will have to account to UNFCCC, to their populations in terms of what they are doing in terms of achieving their NDC. So that the presidential or prime ministerial unit sits with that focus of driving the NDC implementation. And then we've heard other speakers just talking about that, how can government engage investors? And really the thought is in looking at the procurement models that are available in jurisdictions and looking at the possibility of having procurements early in the process that are actually the procurements of the investors. So the investors come in as partners to the public sector and actually look at the NDC. There is a mapping of the NDC priorities, because with each NDC priority, there will be different sources of funding, different sources of contract, different routes of procurement. So it's in mapping out the NDC requirement to what is appropriate from a legal and financing perspective. And so the early investor involvement would be something that would be a procurement process, so there wouldn't be that concern of governments looking to favour particular providers over other investors. It would be about getting the right investor for the right for the NDC project. And so those Hubert's busy talk.
Yes,
Those Hubert were just a couple of thoughts.
Yes.
Obviously, could keep going and talking
Yes.
about other things, but
No,
I
think that's perfect. I think that's very clear. And as we say, as we go into a new round and phase of NDCs, it's not just governments that we have to raise their ambition. We also have to come up with innovative ideas and contribute, wherever we think we can be helpful as it relates to private capital mobilization. And I think in that same spirit, in terms of the mobilization of large pools of institutional capital, I'm going to turn to you now, Frederick. I mean, you're part of the, well, obviously you're a pension fund in your own right, but you're part of the institutional investor group on climate change, who also has a keen interest to support the NDCs in their new manifestation and their new ambition. But the International Investor Group on Climate Change also put out some very specific ideas about how governments could sort of lessen the gap, and perhaps how we as the investment community could be clearer to also help lessen the gap. It's not one side or the other. It'd be great if you could share the highlights of that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here today. When it comes to reaching our fiduciary duty, we are increasingly taking countries' transition plans into consideration. We use the plans for asset allocation, risk management, and capital deployment strategies. However, in the current form, the NDCs significantly vary in quality and also in detail across countries, and often lack sufficient information about policy implementation. And there is today a disconnect between the commitments from countries
and the concrete action plans. According to IEA, there is a gap, and the gap is currently insufficient to meet the 1.5-degree scenario that we all have agreed upon. So in the updated NDCs, countries have the chance to develop credible transition plans that will drive investments. And credibility is key in this sense. And we heard in the panel before about reputational risk, and I think reputational risk and credibility goes hand in hand. So yeah, I would like to bring up the Global Investor Statement on Climate Crisis that was published last week. 500 investors globally, representing more than $70 trillion US, came together to put out recommendations to countries when now going into the process of developing and further evaluate the NDCs that will be launched next year. And I will bring up a few points from that statement that will be discussed further here in New York tomorrow at the event that the series is hosting. First of all, produce more granular detail on sectoral pathways, which is important. We heard an example from Gambia earlier here about agriculture sector. These kind of sectoral transition plan has to be developed, and also ensure that goals on the near term, 2030, 2035, are also in line with the 1.5 scenario. And mention what is expected from the private sector and how the private sector will contribute to the transition. These expectations will create business opportunities. Implement robust carbon pricing, rising over time with appropriate coverage, and also establish plans and targets to phase out fossil fuel use. Transitioning away from fossil fuels is now a formal goal of public policy, and it's written into international law. So we believe it's important for a credible transition plan to actually address the phase out of fossil fuel use. And also mandate climate-related disclosure across the financial system. Transparency will produce more efficient markets. Require the public disclosure 1.5 pathway, aligned transition plans for listed and large non-listed companies, and also asset managers and asset owners. Mandatory climate risk disclosure, covering scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions data. And also as a last point, investors have noted the absence of human rights standards in many countries' transition plans. This absence means that policies indirectly encourage investors and companies to bolster their renewable portfolios without taking in consideration social concerns. And this goes against the principle of a just transition. So an integrated approach for social and environmental justice. And ending with saying that the whole of a government approach is essential to unlocking the capital that is needed. And we are looking forward and are happy to collaborate with countries and governments on producing these new NDCs.
Wonderful. No, thank you very much. Pablo, I hope that was useful as an institutional investor perspective. I think it's very well documented. It's a statement that can be shared. So thank you, Frederick, for that. And now we're going to come to Marc-Andre Blanchard, and a key part of what we are doing here, and then we'll get to Catherine, but we have a special little interlude that we're going to facilitate in just a moment. But for now, Marc-Andre, we're really keen to get your views on, you're a blended finance champion, and ambassador and leader. What is your message to philanthropies to participate in blended finance and project development as it relates to advancing NDCs to sort of de-risk, to mobilize private capital at scale for African NDC-aligned projects?
Thank you, Hubert, and thank you. I'm very happy to be here and with the panelists, and I want to salute your leadership and your resilience in your leadership, Hubert. It's really, so thank you.
If I could,
Yes.
if I could just interject just one second. We have two VVIP guests and friends. We have Her Excellency Ramotulaye Diallo Ndiaye, the founder and CEO of the Great Green Wall of Africa Foundation. And we have, please help me welcome Her Excellency Josepha Leonel Cornella Sacco, who is the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment at the African Union Commission. You're welcome. Yeah.
Well, Excellencies, thank you. So I'll just, you know, for me, let's talk about blended finance first, because the pitch I make to philanthropy, to me, is the same that I make to institutional investors or government about blended finance. I mean, there's a role for everyone, and everybody has a different role to play to make sure that we have more capital that flows into parts of the world where it doesn't flow at the moment. There's a good news about blended finance. 2023 was the highest year, that the year that there was the most blended finance in emerging markets. But it was only about $18 billion. And there were only 3 whales, there were only 3 platforms that were over $1 billion. So we're far from where we should be. But we're increasing. And the thing about blended finance is let's accept that for many of the things we need to be doing, not everything, because in each of the countries, if we're talking about Africa, in each of the countries, there's some entrepreneurs that are there, there's some local financial institutions that are there that do the right things, and there's a growth that is there that is actually very attractive for everybody in some cases and all of that. So that's fine. For very big, substantial transaction where my institutional investors can play a role. And let's just never forget, you know, because we're expecting that the World Bank Group and stuff will take care of these things, and it's tiny compared to the task at hand. And the World Bank Group is doing great things, but it won't be able, in my mind, to do what we need to be doing. Is actually, just think about that. The institutional capital in the world is 900 times bigger than all of the MDBs taken together. So I prefer to actually focus on how we're going to get institutional investors more at scale and faster in some countries than when we are. We need blended finance for that. Because in my fund, we have, and you know, I won't bore you with this, we've said that, we know about that we have fiduciary obligation. My fund, we owe a pension to 6 million Quebecers. So it's not about, we're not a development agency, we're not a charity place. We have great values, we're the most, you know, the #1 sustainable fund in the world. All of that, we believe in that, we believe in strong communities, but we're an investors and we need to produce returns. So, how do we do that? The risk-return equation is actually not the right one for many things that we need to be doing, not only in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in my country, in Canada. And so there are some of the same challenges. Like we need to build infrastructure actually where there's no market for it. But it's needed for adaptation or all of it. So we need to talk about blended finance. We are doing it in Montreal with a light rail train for 67 kilometers. It's a blended finance facility with us, the government of Canada, the government of Quebec, cities, blah, 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 the energy producers and all of that. So we need the same thing in large parts of Africa. How are we going to get there? We're going to get and philanthropy has a role to play. But philanthropy, you know, we all think that there's a deep pocket that will come just for charity reasons. Yeah, there are some people like Gates that does that, but very few. What do they want? They made their money by being entrepreneurs. And they made their money by taking big risks. So they're willing to take big risks. They're willing to take bigger risks than my institution is willing to take that. So that's why we need to partner with them. And then, but there's many ways of de-risking ourselves. It's actually not only by, you know, we need concessional capital. So I'm glad that the B20 and the G20, Brazil is leading the way. They're going to talk about 75 billion needed throughout the world for concessional capital that will help de-risk some investment made by institutions like mine. We are talking about leveraging that money by 5 times. So $75 billion of public capital that will come from some donor countries. People say, another number, blah, 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 it won't be able to do it. The UAE last year at the COP put $30 or $35 billion on the table in concessional capital, by catalytical capital. So it's feasible. And we just need to divert some of the ODA money that actually should go into DFIs in development finance institutions of countries like Canada, UK, US, and all of that, to actually really be able to de-risk and go with us and partner with us, and then partner with some local partners and local institutions and governments and philanthropy and other groups to actually go and do the things that we should be doing. So I hear us talking about, we need more of this, of information about that. Yes, I'm a big believer in disclosure to align capital. I'm a big believer in all of the plans we need to be doing. But it's like we cannot, it's like when I arrived at the UN, as an ambassador of Canada, there was a number 2 of the UN, was an old guy from Sweden at the time, I forgot his name. He told me, there are 3 legs at world peace. One is security, one is development, and one is governance. You need to work on the 3 legs at the same time to have peace in the world. If you only work on development, no security, it won't work. If you only work on development, on security and governance, there's no development, it won't work. Look at Haiti. That's a case in point. But so we need to work on all things. We need to work on the governance. We need to work on the enabling environment in local markets. But we also need to work globally to actually make sure the instruments are at scale for investors like us. And we need to work with philanthropy to actually come in, because they have a different role to play than my institution. And then we need to work on all sources of capital. Insurance companies will be a big part of it. And technology players will be a big part of it. So we need Uber collaboration like we've never had before.
Can I just interject it? Oh, can I just interject on that?
Yes.
One point? In terms of the Uber collaboration, I'd like us to be able to hold that thought. I'd like us to have 2 interventions that will hopefully address some of what you're saying now from our dignitaries, and then we can continue if you would.
Perfect. I was just finishing by saying we need Uber collaboration, but we need to celebrate champions, and we need to tell stories about what's really happening. That's why it's so important to share best practices, because it's never been done before, whether it's decarbonization or blended finance or success throughout Africa by entrepreneurs. We need to be aware of that throughout the world. That was the end of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, Marc-Andre, you may just get your wish, because in the moment you may see champions celebrated, but or in fact you absolutely will see champions celebrated.
That's phenomenal.
So in that spirit, Catherine, we're going to come back to you, but in the first instance, we're going to have just a very high-level presentation and some goodwill keynote remarks from Her Excellency Ramatoulaye Diallo Ndiaye, who is the founder and the CEO of the Great Green Wall Foundation. We were talking about the Great Green Wall today as an incredible vision that requires incredible leadership, and I think now you're going to hear about some of that leadership. You're welcome.
Esteemed partners, colleagues, distinguished guests, good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here today, this afternoon, and I am deeply honored to speak at this critical space on this critical issue of aligning private capital mobilization with climate action and sustainable development in Africa. But first, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to a champion, the chair of this summit, my dear brother, Dr. Hubert Denso, chairman of Africa Investor. Some hands for him, please. And to all our co-host partners for championing this essential conversation. But how can I go on without extending a special thanks to my sister, Her Excellency Josepha Lionel Sacco, for her outstanding dedication in creating a favorable environment within the African Union for investment in climate initiatives across the continent. For people who have not seen her or have not met her, believe me, this is one woman, one of the kind, one that I'm really personally proud of, one that has done so much in Africa for the climate, for the environment, for the sustainable development, and for this environment to get it ready for the investment that we are talking about today. So I would like to acknowledge our esteemed speakers for their thought-provoking insights and the valuable strategies they have shared on unlocking investment opportunities in Africa. As we have discussed, the impacts of climate change are no longer a distant threat to Africa. They are a pressing reality. The continent faces rising sea levels, prolonged droughts, food insecurity, and devastating extreme weather events. As we confront these challenges, one thing is clear: securing a sustainable future for Africa will require unprecedented levels of investment. Africa is at a crossroads, grappling with both the urgency of climate vulnerability and the need for sustainable development. As my champion was saying, the time to act is now. We can no longer stand by. We must align private capital with Africa climate goals for both adaptation and mitigation. And achieving this will take coordinated efforts from all of us. Today, I would like to call upon everyone here and Africa's visionary partners across the globe to join us in this mission. We must mobilize capital to support Africa's nationally determined contributions, NDCs, the Nairobi Declaration, and broader sustainable development goals, SDGs, across the continent. Mobilizing private capital is crucial for one, scaling renewable energy solutions that can provide clean, affordable power to millions across Africa. Number two, building climate resilient infrastructure to protect cities, towns, and rural communities from the devastating effects of the extreme weather. Number three, supporting sustainable agriculture and food systems to ensure food security for Africa's growing population. And number four, driving innovation in water management and other critical sectors that are already facing the pressures of climate change, just to name a few. Aligning private capital with climate action in Africa is not just about corporate responsibility. It is a strategic business opportunity. Africa's green economy presents tremendous potential, from a booming renewable energy market to sustainable agribusiness and eco-friendly infrastructure projects. By investing in these areas, private capital can generate significant social, environmental, and financial returns. But the window of opportunity is closing fast. We must act with urgency, boldness, and unity. Our leadership and investment can help turn the tide on climate change, creating lasting benefits for Africa and for the world. Together, we can build a sustainable and resilient future for the continent. The future is green. The time for action is now. Let us mobilize, invest, and create a more sustainable Africa together to get the Africa that we want. I thank you. But before I leave the stage, allow me to introduce our next speaker, my dear sister, Her Excellency, Ambassador Josepha Lionel Sacco, Africa Union Commissioner for Agriculture. Bear with me because the title is so long. Africa Union Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment to deliver the closing remarks. Thank you.
Merci, merci, le chef, mon très cher frère Hubert Danso. I'm speaking French. At times I don't even know what I'm speaking. Thank you very much, my dear brother, for giving me the floor through my sister, my youngest sister, for really inviting me here this afternoon. Let me acknowledge the presence of our esteemed partners here. I would also like to recognize the presence of the Master of the Ceremony, Dr. Hubert Danso, Chairman of CBN and African Investors. I would like also to recognize the presence of my dear sister, Excellency Ramatoulaye Diallo Ndiaye, founder of the CEO of the Great Green Wall of Africa. Just a parenthesis I want to make here. The Great Green Wall of Africa is an initiative of our head of states and government. They established this Great Green Wall in 2006. And since then, we've been working with the Sahel, and we have a very good response and very good models that we can as well transmit it throughout Africa, and that's what African Union is doing. So this is really our own baby, our own African-made initiative, and I'm so happy that partners today, it has become the chéri of all the partners, so I really encourage, because we know the importance of this initiative, which is the Great Green Wall. Congratulations, my sister, and you know that we are working together between the African Union and us so that we can really achieve the objective that was set by our head of states and government. I would also like to recognize the presence of esteemed guests. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. I know that the time is against me, but this is a very important platform where I can also present myself for what we are doing in African Union in terms of this portfolio that my sister just presented me. It's a huge portfolio, but it is really what is priority today for Africa and globally. We all know that. So with this, I would also like to begin by thanking the organizer for inviting African Union to participate in this important summit at the margin of the UN General Assembly. So I would like to begin by expressing my deep appreciation to all African and international institution investors who have come together in response to the African Union's Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change. Our green investment deal, as we are all aware that last year, it was the first time the continent organized a summit on Africa Summit. And we came out with a very bold declaration, the leaders' declaration, the Nairobi Leader Declaration, which has 60 game-changing if we really want to address the agenda of climate change on the continent. So for us, this is our roadmap. This is our bankable project that we need investment and we need to implement. His Excellency Ruto is really the champion for this thematic, and tomorrow we are going to have the meeting of CAOS, one of the organ of the African Union here in New York. So I believe that you would like to ask me what are the progress that we have made in terms of the department in charge of this to follow up this declaration. So with this, let me continue by saying that your commitment to this investment market signal framework on green industrialization and on your active participation in today's summit marks a critical step forward, not only for Africa, but the global community. The Nairobi Declaration represents Africa's unwavering commitment to addressing the climate crisis through innovative, bold, and strategic investable green industrialization initiative. This summit provides us with an invaluable platform to engage and support our African head of state and government as they lead the charge in driving climate action across the continent. However, this journey cannot be traveled alone. It is through the strategic collaboration between institutions, investors, philanthropies, the government, that the government via institutional investors, public-private partnership, that we can fully realize the potential of Africa's green industrial infrastructure and deliver on our NDC's investment needs. We are all aware that the NDC was approved during the Paris Agreement. Africa is not able to implement even 50% of what we submitted because of lack of finance. And the finance is really an issue because all the tools, we do have the tools. This NDC, they even need to be revisited because they are caduc. They are no longer standing what we did in 2015. So I believe that many of our member states are trying to reshaping their own NDCs because the extreme weather events and the climate change impact is really a reality, and I think we need to contextualize on what we should present, and it's going to expire also in 2025. So I think many countries, African countries, have started already working on this new NDC to be discussed, and I think that we are all working together with our partners, together with the private sector, civil society, to shape really a new NDCs for our member states. So your presence here today is a recognition of the immense potential that this partnership holds to transform Africa's economy and, more importantly, to drive the global green economy. Together, we have the opportunity to establish Africa green industrial infrastructure as a global, competitive, and investable asset class 1 that not only meets the pressing demand of our time to industrialize at speed, but also unlock sustainable prosperity for the future generation. As we are all aware that one of the core crises we are passing in my department is the food crisis. So this food crisis, we set ourselves the Malabo Declaration, we set ourselves during the Malabo Declaration that by 2025, we need to end hunger. The continent has to be food secure. We are not food secure because we have less than 1 year. So we are trying to shape a new 10 years action plan, which is the post-Malabo Declaration. We have already finished, we have already completed with the process of shaping, designing this post-Malabo, and now we are going to have the extraordinary conference summit in January from the 9 to 11 in Kampala. So we are going to have the third decade of the CADEP, which is our comprehensive African agriculture development program, which is the flagship program of the implementation of Agenda 2063 for our continent. So this, we started with Maputo Declaration in 2002. In 2014, 10 years after, we evaluated and we went to Kampala Declaration, Malabo Declaration. Now we are heading to Kampala Declaration. 3 decades, that we are implementing. The results are not so good in terms of food security, but we made a lot of advance because the 7 commitment, which is mutual accountability, and the biannual review report. During my tenure, we presented 4 biannual review reports, and now we are talking with evidence-based in terms of the status of this implementation of the Malabo Declaration. So this partnership will allow us to scale the green industrial infrastructure needed to meet our national determined contribution, while also enhancing Africa's global competitiveness. The establishment of African green industrial infrastructure is a distinct asset class, is a significant step forward, ensuring that our continent plays a central role in the global green industry economy. A market projected to grow beyond 10 trillion annually. Africa's growth trajectory and that of our portfolio can be mutually reinforcing. By investing in African green industrialized infrastructure, we are not only contributing to global climate goal, but also positioning ourselves for long-term risk and the climate adjustment return. Our continent offers unique opportunity to scalable, high-impact investment in clean energy, sustainable agriculture, and resilience and climate resilience infrastructure. Together, we can ensure that Africa is not merely a participant, but also a leader in this industrial revolution and a global hub for the manufacture of essential green technology. The alignment of Africa's development needs with the growth strategy of institutional investors provides a powerful model for addressing the climate crisis while driving economic development. As we focus on scaling investment in green infrastructure, we create opportunity for mutual growth, impacting millions of lives, creating jobs for our youth, and generating substantial return on investment. Through our collective effort, we can unlock innovative financing mechanisms that blend public, private, and philanthropic capitals, ensuring the continent's green industrial infrastructure becomes both sustainable and globally competitive. Our vision is clear. Africa is an investable powerhouse in the global green economy, manufacturing the green technology that drives solutions. For the benefit of Africa and the world, we are continue to engage with one another. I would like to highlight a priority issue from the Nairobi Declaration, the importance of putting nature on African government's balance sheet. The critical initiative emphasizes the importance of integrating natural into the financial architecture of our continent, ensuring that natural resources are valued, protected, and accounted for in our economy's decision. We therefore welcome the SMI, Africa Council Nature on a Balance Sheet initiative. We support this initiative firmly. We appreciate its institutional investor-public partner approaches, which recognizes that by embedding nature on the balance sheet, we are making an ambitious statement. Africa's natural wealth is a key asset for both the continent and the world, we have 60% of arable land. So we can believe that we can feed Africa and we can feed the world. We can be the breadbasket for the entire world because we have 60% of arable land and we have the youngest population in among the other regions. So we have all these advantages. We have sun and we also have water. So I think that agriculture should really take the lead in this green industrialization, and we know that majority of our trade here in Africa from now is agricultural products and services. So I think this is an area where industrialization is really accountable. We are tired of exporting raw material. We want to really industrialize, a green industrialization. My previous life, I was Secretary General of the Coffee Organization. We want to blend the coffee in Africa to create jobs so that we can have a strong industry to provide jobs and wealth for our government instead of us to keep on going to these banks and asking for debt. I think this is the time for us to change the narrative. Africa Green Industrial Future is not just a possibility, but an investable reality. We look forward to your continued and close engagement with the African Union, and specifically to co-create ambitious investable NDCs program aligned with the work of our communities, of our committees of the head of state and government on climate change. That's the meeting we are going to have tomorrow. Unfortunately, I will not be here to, really buy in the outcome that is coming from this conversation, but I believe that my sister will give me some hints so that I will be able to present it to our head of states tomorrow in tomorrow's meeting. As we forge ahead on this critical journey together, as we shape and pursue new ambitious investable NDCs, I firmly believe we can create a new long-term investment legacy through Africa's just and equitable energy transformation, a legacy of global clean energy tree and green technology investment competitiveness and leadership of the $10 trillion per annum and growing global green industrial economy, delivering both climate and the risk-adjusted return for our people, our planet, our children, and our grandchildren. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Merci beaucoup por votre atenção. Muitas gracias por vossa atenção. Muito obrigada. Asante sana. Shukran Nazira.
We sit here and we talk about the Nairobi Declaration and green industrialization and the types of leadership that we need on this continent. This is the lady, the architect of the Nairobi Declaration, Africa's green industrial investment deal. And it just so happens in our African NDC Investment Awards, we instituted, inspired by all of the investment and the investor community's response to the Nairobi Declaration, a category in the awards on African green industrialization. And there was a lot of competition in that, but we wanted something that exemplified an institutional investor-public partnership, something that brought together heads of state and the private sector around a shared vision that has a legacy component well baked in. And I'm proud to announce that that particular category of award is going to be awarded to the African Union under the leadership of Her Excellency Joseph Asako. So please join me in congratulating her for the African Green Industrialization Champion of the Year Award.
this award to my sister and my brother.
As the Commissioner mentioned, as we've been talking about all day, as well as the institutional investment community, we need technical expertise to be able to develop bankable projects, and that tends to reside in the technologies and the expertise within the private sector that's already within our portfolio. So we have these resources, and to note that Your Good platform has just made an announcement of about, I think, $300 to $400 million commitment to the green economy and green infrastructure. So just really wanted to put that into context about how you would see the NDCs as a potential instrument in the platform. But the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I represent the Open Society Foundation. So after Gates, that's the second largest philanthropy in the world. So we give away $1.2 to $1.5 billion to really promote open societies and democracies. We've got an impact investment arm, that's the Soros Economic Development Fund. I lead the investment team at the fund. We've invested for 25 years in emerging markets, including Africa. And I think, when we look at there's a need for capital flows. Mm-hmm. There's a need to unlock the potential to get private capital to partner up in these public-private partnerships. I think blended finance is a bit the talk of the town. It is not a new constellation or new approach. I think we've seen some successes. What we want, of course, is to see that the catalytic part that I represent, the philanthropic capital that is concessionary, that doesn't need to give back any returns to investors, that we come in and de-risk in the pursuit of really impact by crowding in more private capital. And I very much agree with that point of view, but I also want to call the attention to an appropriate risk taken by institutional investors and pension funds, commercial investors. What we don't want is to subsidize DFIs, MDBs. We do not want to subsidize unnecessarily, CDBQ in terms of reaching profits. We all want a return on our pensions. That is understandable. But I think there's a conversation to be had in terms of what is the return that would be adequate, and also step back and saying that this is all about, the intersection between democracy, justice, and equity. Even if we talk about green infrastructure, we should also talk about energy access and really about impact. So we really believe in public-private partnerships, what you're doing as an organization to really bring, the stakeholders together. What we also believe in is that the capital needs to come from the continent, right? It cannot only be external investors that come in. And I think that's a journey that we need to push for. Very last comment is, this deserves, and I think you talked to this is more than just, capital. This is about policies and regulations. And clearly, systems change, and that is, that comes with, engagement. I think civil society, what we're trying to do with a commitment of $400 million is really to assist governments to push for these green, just reforms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very well put. But I'm going to call on the Nigerian Director General, if they are in the room now, to respond and hopefully flag some opportunities that might exist in that market before we come to a final close. They've just hosted a Pan-African meeting of the finance and the investment community, and it'll be really good to learn directly from you about that and make the connection, because we heard about what's happening on the continent, and we are the institutional side, but we're very keen to hear your views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here and to hear what's happening, really. I'm sure you're expecting somebody different. I could see the faces in the room like, oh my goodness, is she the one? Yeah, she's the one. So my name is Dr. Nkiruka Maduekwe, and I'm the Director General, Chief Executive Officer of the National Council on Climate Change Secretariat. I have the honor to drive Nigeria's NDC review, a big shoe, but we're doing that very well. I have in the room with me the Ministry of Finance, who are very key to this conversation, and I want to thank them for being here, representing the Minister of Finance, actually, so the team is there. I also want to thank the NDC partnership for the support they've been giving Nigeria from 2000, when we had the first NDC, 2021, and now we're also doing the current review of our NDCs. They've been very supportive as to what Nigeria is doing and where Nigeria has to be. Sitting down in the room, listening to what everybody's saying, and of course that's so what it is we're doing in terms of how do you bridge the gap between public finance, private finance, and then donor financing, because for us, we are going beyond what you call tokenism. Okay, how do you ensure sustainability of what it is we're doing? And to hear you, Madam, speak about, and the Madam as well, speak about green industrialization. For us in Nigeria, the next phase is, of course, the green industrialization, value chain localization. We have what is called the Evergreen Project, where we are saying, okay, we're not going to move raw materials. We want to be able to manufacture them here in Nigeria, renewable energy solutions. And so we've been able to acquire land. Thank you so much, ma'am. We've been able to acquire 5,000 hectares of land, and we actually have an anchor tenant, Solage, and we're also looking for more people to invest in that. So if you are aware, as much as we're talking about renewable energy, but it's very expensive, okay? And for us, how do you, and the whole process of importing that very expensive solution, we want to cut that short and then produce that in Nigeria. We're talking about how do you get investors, right, interested in what it is we're doing with our NDC priorities. Nigeria is one of the three very lucky countries that has been nominated for the pilot program for the navigator that you talked about. And we had the first meeting in Lagos, and where for the very first time you're talking to private sector, and they're very much interested in how do we jump into these NDCs? What exactly is the NDCs, and where do we function in the NDCs? One of the things that showed us was that there has been a gap in communications between the public and the private as to regards of what the NDCs are, and how important it is for us to get private sector engagement in financing the NDCs. For us in Nigeria, very key is that we're a fossil fuel dependent country. We're also a fossil fuel producing country. And a lot of the conversation is leave the oil in the ground. But leaving the oil in the ground also brings about stranded assets, stranded risks, right? How do we transition? And I love what someone said here in the panel. How do we transition from that point of the fossil fuel to where we want to be renewable energy? We're talking about technologies. Now, how can we get people, private sector, to invest in carbon capture, utilization, storage? That for us is one of the things we'll be looking at. Of course, for us is clean cooking. Again, for us is nature-based solutions, financing that, and then health. Because if you're aware, one of the conversations we're going to have at COP29 is bringing in the health sector in NDCs. And there's a lot of investment opportunities in the nexus between climate resilient health solutions. And I'm asking, think about that, private sector. Article 6, carbon credits. For us in Nigeria, again, we're moving away from depending on our fossil fuel revenue to non-oil revenue. And the carbon market presents that huge opportunity for us. And so we're asking for investors to please think about that as well. One of the things we've also seen, and I think someone touched about it here, is the capacity with the project fund, the project developers with regards to carbon projects. So there's this excitement of, oh yes, money, yes, but what exactly is a carbon project? What does it mean? How do you finance it? Bankable projects. And so that's one of the things the checklist is also going to do, which is bridging the gap between that and building the capacity for that. So there's a lot of I would say there's a lot of opportunity for the private sector to come in. And one of the things someone said to me, I was talking to the Chambers of Commerce. I had the opportunity to do that in Nigeria. And they said, we have a lot of money, but we don't know what to do with it. I told them, come and invest in my NDCs, so to speak, our NDCs. So going forward, what are we doing as a country? One of the things we're doing is, because Article 6 is also very important, is that thanks to the UNDP supporting us, and also the NDC partnership supporting us, we're doing a training, capacity building for women, youth, and private sector. Very important. Private sector on Article 6, what does it mean and where can they come in? So thank you everybody for the opportunity, and God bless.
She's after my job. Very well done. Thank you so much. Thank you again for your attention. We look forward to continuing this journey with each and every one of you, public, private, philanthropic. I think it's going to take a collective effort, as we say on the continent, the village that must raise this child to deliver private capital at scale to the NDCs. So I thank you very much.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.